Hello friends, this is Worm, and I have a question for you. What makes a raid encounter hard? And the reason I wanted to talk about this is because, of course, in Final Shape, we are getting the ultimate raid, so to speak, right? It's the raid where we're going to go in, we're going to fight, and we're going to potentially destroy the witness, potentially align with the witness. I don't really know what's going to happen. Obviously, I don't have any insider information, but with this new raid coming, I've heard a lot of people talking about how it should be the hardest raid and the biggest raid and the best raid we've ever had in Destiny's history. And obviously, I kind of agree with this. Like, I kind of agree that this has to be the pinnacle of the raiding experience, you know, as opposed to something like Root of Nightmares, which was I'd say generally not really well received. This raid really does need to blow players out of the water. And it made me start thinking about what actually makes a raid encounter hard, and especially with Pantheon going on right now. Like, raid encounters, they vary in difficulty, you know. And in Pantheon, I've got a personal list of like the easiest to most difficult encounters to do, you know, and something like Oryx is up there at being one of the easier ones. But then something like Planets, or the Explicator, I should say, is down by one of the hardest encounters. So I figured we'd talk today about what makes a raid encounter hard, what makes it difficult, stuff like that. So starting off with the first idea behind what makes a raid difficult, obviously it's your team composition, and I don't mean warlocks, hunters, titans, blah blah blah, although we'll talk about that in just a second. But mainly I'm talking about the experience that your teammates have. Obviously, if you are trying to do Pantheon, say this week at week 4, with a team who's never really done these raids before, you're gonna have a difficult time. If you're trying to do, you know, say Crota's End on the first day it launched, or maybe the second or third day, and you're going in with a team of players who's never done a raid before, never done Crota's End, never done a raid in general, it's gonna be more difficult than if you take in like a seasoned clan of players who all do, you know, world's first races together and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of, you know, that's what I'm talking about. Like, obviously your team composition and your team experience is going to vary your difficulty in raid encounters. But let's say you have a team of players who all know what's going on. Maybe they're not the world's best, you know, we're not talking about the, you know, most elite, you know, world's first raiders, anything like that. We're just kind of generally talking about people who know exactly what they're doing, what's going on, how to do encounters. Everybody knows the different roles. What then makes a raid encounter hard? And this is where I really started wondering, you know, or started contemplating making this video, because like I said, something like Oryx, pretty easy. Now granted, Oryx is a little bit different because you literally have an immunity field where you just can't take any damage. But Rolk, for example, Rolk is pretty easy in my opinion. But Caretaker is not. Explicator is not. In fact, when I get on LFGs, the two most popular checkpoints that I find are Caretaker and Explicator. Like, those two are, they by far outnumber all the other ones. And why? It's because they are a lot tougher. And of course, when we're talking about Caretaker, we'll use Caretaker. I think one of the things that makes a raid encounter difficult is the actual health that a boss has. Never mind mechanics, let's just talk about overall health. And no, I'd like to note here, I know that most bosses in Destiny 2 are pretty spongy bosses. You know, they have a lot of health points, with the exception of maybe something like Atrax and the Explicator and stuff like that. But like Golgoroth, Caretaker, they have a ton of health. And so it makes sense that it's more difficult, you know, and especially in Pantheon, you have to clear it within, you know, if you're trying to get platinum or a high score, you have to clear it within 2 phases. Like, that can be difficult. But I think that just when you have a boss with a ton of health, like something like Golgoroth, and you're having to extend the damage phase, like, never mind what everybody's doing, anytime you're extending the time that you're in a fight, you're running the risk of somebody dying and then somebody else dying and then having to chain res and then kind of ruining the whole run, so to speak. So yeah, I think boss health is a factor, but I don't think it's necessarily an important factor. I don't think that a boss should always have just like 5 billion health points. You know, look at Atrax. Atrax doesn't have a whole lot of health. Atrax is a totally unique encounter because it's not about how much damage you can put out, it's how fast you can put it out, right? And so that's, you know, that's one of the things that I thought about, you know, what makes a raid encounter difficult. And of course, you, the viewer watching this video, might not think that a boss's health is that important when it comes to difficulty. You might look at Caretaker and say, no, Caretaker's a big pushover. You know, he's very easy to kill. You might look at Golgoroth and say, man, yeah, he's a cakewalk, blah, blah, blah. And that's completely fine. But I want to move on to my next point, which is in my opinion, what really makes raid encounters difficult. And that is the number of moving parts that you have to have in these encounters. Take, for example, Caretaker. In Caretaker, you've got 2 people to take the gaze and then 4 people doing damage. And that's basically it. It's a very easy and simple encounter to do and understand. But then you go to something like the Explicator. And the Explicator is where you start to have problems, because you have 4 people that are all having to run between plates. You've got 2 people who are left in charge of killing ads, and there's a bunch of ads in there, and I don't really like to use the term ad clear. I think that's a pretty, cheap way of explaining it. They're backup runners and stuff, but their primary job is to clear out a path for the runners to run from, the top plates across, or, from the bottom across, stuff like that. And it's very difficult, because if one person messes up, potentially the whole run is ruined. And we've seen encounters like this before that have a ton of different moving parts. Like, look at Rolk. Rolk was very difficult to understand, especially the first couple, I'd say even the couple of months, because you have to have people that, number one, don't die, but number two, know what they're doing. And so you'd have instances where you join a raid and 5 people, all they know how to do is, oh, I know how to do ad clear on this. Okay, not 5 of y'all can do ad clear. In fact, I would argue that I should be doing ad clear, because on some of these encounters like Caretaker or like Explicator, ad clear is super important, and you need somebody who's really, really strong at ad clear to do ad clear. Ad clear is not a boss you just slap the weakest player on. I would say that it's probably a better idea to slap the weakest player on like some of the puzzle stuff where they don't have to kill a whole lot. They just got to run, because what's easier than running around? In Caretaker, what's easier than running in that room, picking up 3 symbols and calling out the symbols you get? And so that's kind of what makes a raid encounter really difficult to me, is the number of moving parts. Because when you are splitting the team up, you've got people, okay, you've got to be a reader, you've got to be a runner, you've got to be a watcher, like all this stuff. Everybody has a different role. If one person goes down, that whole situation is now in jeopardy, because, oh, well, now the runner has to go do the watcher's job, or the watcher has to do the reader's job, or something like that. And I'm just making these words up, by the way, but I think that's what makes a raid difficult. So let's talk about the raid where we're going to be fighting the Witness and what it is going to have in it / entail. And obviously we don't know, I haven't seen any leaks about this raid that's upcoming. We don't know how many encounters are going to be mechanic based, how many encounters are going to be puzzles, how many encounters are going to be just straight up DPS. Like, we don't know anything about that, but I'm feeling that we're going to have a good mixture of all these different styles. We're going to have a mixture of, okay, like it's primarily just DPS, you got 1 or 2 people that are doing X thing, but it's going to be DPS. Then you're going to have an encounter where all 6 people have to know what to do at their position. There's not this oh, I'll just do ad clear, because anytime like Bungie knows that they want this raid to be difficult. They want it to be fun. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's not fun, but it's not fun for a raid if all it has is, 5, 6 different encounters that's just, oh, ad clear. Like, that's not really fun. That's not really entertaining, especially to the hardcore player base. And let's be real, the hardcore player base are the ones that do the raid. Like, if you look at casuals, they're more than likely not out here doing raids. They might do a couple raids here and then, but the hardcore players who are doing raids every single week, who are, trying to find optimized damage strategies, trying to, perfect their skill, trying to, maybe go for a world record, speed run, whatever. These are the players that Bungie has to keep in mind when designing these raid encounters. And I don't think that they have to keep it solely in mind. Like, obviously, I think there should be encounters that are more accessible to the casual player base. But I think that what we're going to see in the final shape is we're going to see this escalating difficulty. Like, that first encounter is probably going to be some very simple mechanic based stuff. Like, look at the first encounter of Root of Nightmares. It's going to be run the balls, or connect the dots, basically. Very simple, very easy. And as it goes up, it gets more and more difficult. And then finally, for the ultimate boss fight, for the final phase of the raid, the final checkpoint of the raid, whatever you want to call it, it's going to be 6 people have to know a very specific role, and they have to know what to do. And you can't have one person just, oh, I don't know what to do. I think also another thing that's going to add, that adds difficulty, is having 5 or 6 different roles that switch between players. So it's not like, oh, I'll run this time and then I'll just run every single time. So all I have to ever know is runner. It's going to be, oh, I'm going to run this time. Okay, well, now I have a debuff that prevents me from running. So now I've got to be a watcher. Now I've got to be a reader. Now I've got to be an ad clear. Like, it's going to rotate players out. That is where real difficulty is going to shine, because if you don't know all the roles to a T, you're going to struggle when you're presented with that. And I think that's one of the reasons why people complain about Oryx. Like, the people that complain about Oryx is because Oryx has a random mechanic of who is going to become torn between dimensions. And of course, if you're somebody who's never really done the raid, you only do ad clear, you know, or stand on plates, like, oh, now you have to run between dimensions. Okay, well, I got up here, I got this brand, what do I do with it? You know, and then there's like a little bit of panic that sets in. And of course, with this whole timer, or with the whole Oryx encounter, everything's on a timer. So you're too slow and then you wipe, blah, 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 or light eaters get a bomb, something like that. Like, you know, these mechanics that randomly select players to do things are ones that I would say are more difficult. And again, I think we're going to probably see this in the Final Shape raid at some point. Like, we're going to see a random assignment of, you know, like I said, torn between dimensions. I don't think it'll be called that, but it'll be for the witness specifically. But yeah, that's my thoughts on what makes raids difficult. I think that hopefully this raid is difficult, but I don't want to see it difficult to the point of, like, you know, like a contest mode. Like, I don't think that artificially bringing up the enemy's level or lowering our levels is going to be good. I hope that it's difficult because it requires knowledge of the encounters and stuff like that. Like, I've said this before, I've never been a huge fan of raids that or any content that just lowers your level, just slams your level down so it's super low. That's artificial challenge. Like, that's just, okay, it's not even challenge, it's just like, okay, I just, you know, can't really take damage from anything. It leads to super passive play. I think that in the upcoming raid, if we see encounters that are just, all the enemies are at your level, right? But you have to know how to do these mechanics. It would lead to a much more fun environment that would still hold that level of difficulty that the hardcore players like to see. But I think that also the casual players, if they'll just sit down and learn about it, watch videos on it, get in there and play with other casuals and practice at it, they will also learn that, hey, it's not too difficult. Because I think also, the last thing I want to talk about here, having a difficult encounter is okay as long as over time you can speed it up and learn how to beat it. If you have encounters where it's difficult every single time, like Acquisition in Vow of the Disciple is still an incredibly difficult encounter for me. Like, I've done it I don't know how many times, and every single time it's like, okay, it's going to be a wipe on Acquisition, no doubt about it, because it's a difficult encounter. There is a ton of moving parts, you know, with all the symbols you're getting and the time limits and stuff like that. But yeah, that's just a little side note about Acquisition. But I think that if Bungie can find a way to comfortably, you know, have a bunch of players doing all different stuff, maybe have, you know, not too many ads. I think there's a suffocating amount of ads. Again, that's artificial difficulty, you know. Oh, now instead of 5 scions that spawn, there's going to be 30 scions that spawn, or now we're going to throw in an additional couple of centurions or something like that. Like, again, I think that's just it's overdoing it. It's not adding to the actual difficulty. It's artificially just making it harder, and that's not necessarily fun. Now, if you want to add extra centurions that say, hey, you know, we've added these extra centurions for difficulty, but now if you kill those centurions, you get a buff that allows you to deal 2, 3, 4% more damage to the boss, then yeah, like, I could understand that. But at the same time, like, I don't want to see that artificial difficulty by adding just a billion ads. I don't want to see artificial difficulty by saying, oh, your light level is limited in this encounter and stuff like that. But that's enough talking from me. I want to hear your thoughts on difficulties in raids. What do you think makes a raid difficult, and what are some of the most difficult encounters in Destiny 2 in your opinion? Let me know all that in the comment section below. Of course, if you like today's video, do me a favor, drop a like, helps the channel out a lot. Subscribe for more daily Destiny content. Guys, do me a favor, watch the videos you see here on the end screen, because for whatever reason YouTube thinks you'll like them. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.